The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming, the way Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes during our anniversary dinner, how she'd started taking those lengthy business calls in the garden where our security cameras couldn't reach. But after 32 years of marriage, you develop a peculiar blindness to the warning signs. You convince yourself that the foundation is too strong to crumble. I was wrong. Dead wrong. I'm David Mitchell, and at 58, I thought I had it all figured out. Executive position at Mitchell & Reed Investment Partners, the firm I'd built from scratch with my college roommate, Tom Reed. A sprawling colonial in Greenwich, Connecticut. 2 successful kids in college. And Sarah, my Sarah, the woman who'd stood beside me through the lean years, who'd nursed me back to health after my heart attack at 45. The distance had crept in so gradually that I barely noticed it. Like watching a garden die in time-lapse, one day you look up, and everything's brown and withered, but you can't pinpoint exactly when the decay began. "Dave, we need to talk about the Morgan account," Tom said that fateful Tuesday morning, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. He stood in my office doorway, his normally pristine appearance slightly disheveled, his Windsor knot askew. "What about it? We closed that deal last week." I remembered the celebration dinner clearly. Sarah had begged off, claiming a migraine. Another warning sign I'd ignored. Tom's hands were trembling as he closed my office door. The numbers don't add up. Someone's been siphoning funds, small amounts at first, but it's grown. Nearly 8 million in the past year alone. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I oversee all major transactions myself. Through Sarah's accounting department. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah had insisted on handling our firm's books from the beginning. For keeping it in the family, she'd said with that smile that could still make my heart skip a beat after all these years. "Show me," I demanded, my voice hoarse. The next 2 hours were a descent into hell. Tom laid out spreadsheet after spreadsheet, each one revealing a carefully orchestrated dance of numbers. Funds disappeared into ghost accounts, then reappeared laundered through offshore entities. It was beautiful in its complexity, devastating in its implications. "There's more," Tom said quietly, pulling out his phone. "I hired a PI last month when I first noticed the discrepancies. I didn't want to believe it either, Dave. The photos were like bullets to the chest. Sarah, entering a luxury apartment building in Manhattan. Sarah, having dinner with a man I recognized as James Porter, our biggest competitor. Sarah, kissing him in Central Park. The apartment's in Porter's name," Tom continued, his voice gentle. "They've been meeting there for at least 6 months. The money, it's been going to joint accounts they opened together." I sat there, staring at my hands on the desk. They looked older somehow, like they belonged to someone else. In a way, they did. The David Mitchell who walked into the office that morning was dead. Does anyone else know? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. No. I came to you first. But Dave, we need to act fast. The SEC filing is due next week. If this comes out, everything we built would crumble. Our reputation, our clients' trust, all of it, gone. And Sarah knew it. She'd positioned herself perfectly, holding not just my heart but my entire life's work hostage. That evening, I drove home like a man in a trance. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming softly. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw her as she was 30 years ago, the young accountant who'd captured my heart with her brilliant mind and infectious laugh. "You're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Rough day." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed before. A hardness around her eyes, a calculation in her smile. How long had that been there? "We need to talk about the Morgan account," I said, using the same words Tom had used earlier. The knife clattered to the counter. Sarah's face didn't change, but her knuckles went white against the granite countertop. "And about your apartment in Manhattan," I added quietly. "The one you share with James Porter." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Sarah's lips curved into a smile I'd never seen before, cold, triumphant, almost pitying. "Well," she said, reaching for her wine glass. "I suppose we do have quite a bit to discuss, don't we, darling?" The sun was setting outside our kitchen window, casting long shadows across the marble floors. As I watched my wife take a calm sip of her wine, I realized this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a war. And Sarah had already fired the first shot. That night, I watched Sarah sleep. The moonlight painted silver streaks across our Egyptian cotton sheets she'd insisted on buying from that boutique in Milan last summer. Now I wondered, had Porter been there too, laughing at my ignorance over espresso in some discreet cafe while my wife shopped for our bed linens with blood money? The familiar curve of her shoulder, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, it was all a masterpiece of deception. I'd always admired Sarah's mind, her gift for numbers and strategy. Now I realized I'd been admiring the architect of my own destruction. "You're staring," she murmured, not opening her eyes. Even now, she could sense my presence, as if 3 decades of marriage had forged an unbreakable connection. But that was another lie, wasn't it? "Just thinking about the Morgan account," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Can't sleep." She rolled over, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "Come to bed, David. Everything looks better in the morning." The casual confidence in her voice made my blood boil. She thought she had me cornered, the perfect trap. If I exposed her fraud, I'd destroy myself too. Our firm would collapse, our reputation shattered. The SEC investigation would consume everything we'd built. She knew I'd never risk it. Or so she thought. At 3 a.m., I sat in my study, surrounded by financial records I'd quietly copied over the past week. Tom had been right, the complexity of Sarah's scheme was breathtaking. But he'd only seen the surface. As I dug deeper, patterns emerged from the chaos like constellations forming in the night sky. The offshore accounts weren't just about money laundering. They were way stations, points of transfer in a larger network. Sarah hadn't just been stealing from our firm, she'd been systematically infiltrating our client base, redirecting their trust and their billions toward Porter's company. My phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "Need to meet. Found something. Usual place, 6 a.m. I closed my eyes, remembering when Tom and I first opened our firm. We'd worked out of a converted garage, surviving on coffee and dreams. Sarah had been there too, working late into the night, her dedication seemingly boundless. Had she been planning this even then? How long had she been Porter's agent, planted in my life like a beautiful, poisonous flower? The pre-dawn air was crisp as I pulled into the parking lot of Joey's diner. Tom's silver Mercedes was already there, but something felt off. The diner's windows were dark, unusual, since Joey always opened at 5:30 sharp. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Don't go inside. Tom's not alone. M." I sat there, engine idling, heart pounding. Who was M? And more importantly, was Tom working with Sarah too? The diner's door opened. Tom stepped out, his face pale in the early morning light. Behind him, James Porter emerged like a shadow given form. They hadn't seen me yet. I killed the engine and slid down in my seat, watching as they talked. Tom's body language was wrong, hunched, defensive. Porter's hand rested on his shoulder in what looked like a friendly gesture, but I recognized the subtle tension in Tom's stance. It wasn't a friendly meeting. My phone buzzed a third time. "Same unknown number, check your email. You need to see what your friend Tom really is. M." The email arrived seconds later. Security camera footage from our office, dated 3 months ago. Tom, meeting with Porter after hours. Documents changing hands. Money being counted. My oldest friend. My business partner. Another betrayal to add to the collection. But as I sat there, watching Tom and Porter through the grimy windshield of my car, something shifted inside me. The pain of betrayal crystallized into something harder, colder, more purposeful. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect takedown, wife, friend, and competitor working in concert to dismantle my life. They'd forgotten one thing: I wasn't just some investment banker who got lucky. I was David Mitchell. I'd built an empire from nothing once before. And I'd learned a few tricks of my own along the way. I pulled out my burner phone, the one Sarah didn't know about, and dialed a number I hadn't used in 20 years. Marcus? It's David Mitchell. Remember that favor you owe me? Time to collect. Marcus Kane. The one person Sarah, Tom, and Porter wouldn't see coming. The ghost from my past who knew where all the bodies were buried, literally. As I drove home, the sun was rising over Greenwich, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Sarah would be waking up soon, preparing for another day of perfect deception. She'd smile, kiss me goodbye, and think she was still in control. Let her think that. Let them all think that. Because while they'd spent years planning my destruction, they'd given me something priceless in return, nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous player of all. I touched the burner phone in my pocket, feeling its weight like a loaded gun. Marcus would be on the first flight from Hong Kong. And when he arrived, we'd show them all what real strategy looked like. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The past has a way of haunting you, not as some ethereal specter, but as a living, breathing entity that sleeps beside you, waiting for the perfect moment to bare its teeth. As I sat in my study the next morning, watching Sarah prepare for work through the security feed, I felt 20 years dissolve like morning mist. Marcus Kane. Even thinking his name brought back the copper taste of fear and triumph that had marked those early days of my empire. Before Sarah, before the respectable veneer of Mitchell and Reed, there had been darker foundations. Necessary sins buried beneath the pristine marble of success. Taking the Range Rover today, darling, Sarah called up the stairs, her voice a masterpiece of casual affection. Lunch meeting in the city. Of course, I replied, watching her through the cameras as she checked her lipstick in the hall mirror. Perfect coral pink, matching her Hermes scarf. The same shade she'd worn when we first met, a detail I once found endearing but now recognized as carefully calculated. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons tonight. Another lie, another move in our elaborate chess game. The Hendersons were in Bali. Sarah knew this, of course. She'd smile, claim a last-minute cancellation later. And I would pretend to believe her while tracking her Mercedes to Porter's Manhattan love nest. The front door closed, and I allowed myself to sink into the memory I'd been avoiding. Hong Kong, 1992. The night everything changed. I was nobody then, just another hungry American trying to carve out a piece of the Asian market. Marcus was already a legend in certain circles, the man who could make problems disappear, who knew every skeleton in every corporate closet from Tokyo to Singapore. The typhoon had been howling outside his office on the 47th floor of a nameless building in Wan Chai. Lightning illuminated the room in strobes, casting strange shadows across Marcus's scarred face. "You understand what you're asking," he'd said, studying me with eyes that had seen too much. "Once we do this, there's no going back. No redemption. No clean hands." I'd understood. Porter had already tried to destroy me once back then, a younger, more obvious version of his current scheme. He'd stolen my clients, sabotaged my deals, even tried to frame me for insider trading. I was weeks away from total ruin. "Do it," I'd said. The next day, Porter's Asian operations imploded spectacularly. Evidence of massive fraud emerged. Clients fled. His reputation was destroyed in the eastern markets, all thanks to Marcus's invisible hand. I built my legitimate empire from the ashes of Porter's destruction. A debt was owed, and Marcus never forgot. My phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. A text from an encrypted number landed. Meeting set. The dragon still remembers. M. The dragon. Our old code word for Porter's vulnerability, the secret Marcus had uncovered all those years ago. I'd never asked for details, had never wanted to know. But now. A second text arrived, "You're not the only one he's tried to destroy. Bringing proof. Your wife's role bigger than you think." My hands trembled slightly as I deleted the messages. Sarah's betrayal had felt personal, intimate. But what if it was more? What if I was just the latest target in a longer game? I pulled up the hidden camera feed from Sarah's home office, the one she didn't know about, installed years ago during a renovation she'd insisted upon. For hours, I watched archived footage, looking for patterns I'd missed. There. 3 months ago. Sarah on a video call, speaking Mandarin. I'd always assumed she'd learned it for our business expansion. The audio was poor, but one phrase caught my attention: dragon's teeth. My blood ran cold. That specific phrase, it couldn't be coincidence. A new email arrived, from another anonymous address. Inside, a photo from 1992. Sarah, 20 years younger, standing beside Porter in Hong Kong. The same week my life had nearly been destroyed. The same week I'd made my deal with Marcus. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. Sarah hadn't been assigned to destroy me. She'd been there from the beginning, playing a longer game than I could have imagined. Our entire marriage, our entire life together, it was all built on a foundation of calculated revenge. My phone buzzed one final time, meeting in 1 hour. Bringing the dragon's teeth. Time to end this. M. I stood, straightening my tie in the mirror. The man who looked back at me wasn't the broken husband of yesterday. He was someone older, harder, someone who had emerged from the chrysalis of betrayal transformed. Sarah thought she knew all my secrets. She thought she had stripped me of everything. But she'd forgotten the most important lesson of her own long game: the most dangerous predator is the one you think you've already killed. I checked my watch. 59 minutes until I learned the truth about the woman I'd loved for 30 years. 59 minutes until the real war began. The dragon was about to wake up. And this time, it would burn everything to the ground. The old waterfront warehouse loomed before me like a cathedral of rust and shadow, its broken windows reflecting the late afternoon sun in shards of molten gold. As I killed the engine of my unmarked sedan, I felt time compress and expand like a cosmic accordion, 30 years of carefully constructed identity peeling away to reveal the rawer, hungrier version of myself that had once walked these same docks. Marcus hadn't changed. He stood in the warehouse's mall like a statue carved from darkness, his scarred face a roadmap of violence survived and dealt. The years had turned his hair steel gray, but those eyes, those terrible, knowing eyes, were exactly as I remembered them. Still driving American, he noted, his voice carrying that same strange accent I'd never been able to place. Some habits die hard. Some never die at all, I replied, the old code phrase falling from my lips like muscle memory. He smiled then, a brief flash of teeth in the gloom. Come. She'll be at Porter's apartment for at least 2 more hours. We have much to discuss. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed. Banks of monitors lined one wall, each displaying different camera feeds, Sarah and Porter at various locations, Tom in his office, even my children at their respective colleges. My stomach clenched at the sight. You've been watching my family. I never stopped. Marcus gestured to a steel table where a leather briefcase lay waiting. Because they were never just your family, David. They were always part of the dragon's teeth. The phrase again. I felt cold sweat trickle down my spine. Tell me. Marcus opened the briefcase with deliberate slowness. Inside lay a stack of documents, yellowed with age. Hong Kong, 1992. You thought Porter tried to destroy you then. The truth is more complicated. You weren't the target, you were the test. He spread the documents across the table. Intelligence reports, surveillance photos, financial records. At the center, a photograph I'd never seen before, Sarah, decades younger, standing in a wood-paneled office beside an elderly Asian man I didn't recognize. General Chen Zhao, Marcus said quietly. Porter's true master. The architect of what we're facing now. Sarah was his protégé long before she met you. The truth hit me like a physical blow, reshaping my understanding of reality with the force of its revelation. Our entire marriage was phase one of a multi-decade operation. Marcus's voice carried a note of grudging admiration. The dragon's teeth, it's an ancient strategy. Plant your soldiers in enemy territory, let them take root, grow strong, build trust. Then, when the moment is right, they rise up and destroy from within. My voice sounded distant, hollow. But why me? Why spend 30 years just to destroy one investment firm? Marcus's laugh was bitter. You think this is about your firm? Look closer. He pulled up a complex diagram on the main monitor. My firm was there, but it was just one node in a vast web of connections. As I studied it, patterns emerged that turned my blood to ice. Every major client we've acquired in the past decade, I whispered. Every strategic partnership, every merger. All carefully orchestrated. Your firm isn't just a target, it's a weapon. Sarah and Porter have positioned you at the center of a financial web that touches everything from pension funds to defense contractors. When they trigger the collapse, it creates a cascade effect. The strategic elegance of it was breathtaking. A controlled demolition of the entire sector. And in the chaos, Chen Zhao's organization steps in to rescue key assets at pennies on the dollar. Marcus's face was grim. They've done it before, in smaller markets. But this is their masterpiece. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. My children were never meant to be collateral damage. Marcus pulled up another file. They were insurance. Chen Zhao believes in generational planning. Sarah's mission wasn't just to destroy you, it was to create heirs who could be molded, positioned, used. Rage rose in me then, pure and clarifying. Not the hot anger of betrayal, but something colder, deeper, a glacial fury that transformed everything it touched into diamond-hard purpose. You said you have proof. Something we can use. Marcus nodded, reaching into the briefcase one final time. Sarah made one mistake. She got careless last year, let herself be filmed meeting with Chen Zhao directly. But more importantly, he extracted a small flash drive. She kept records. Insurance against Porter and Chen, in case they ever tried to eliminate her. Everything we need to expose the entire operation. And destroy my family's reputation in the process. I stood, walking to the window. The sun was setting now, painting the harbor in blood-red hues. Unless. Marcus's voice carried a dangerous note. I turned. Unless what? Unless we use her own strategy against her. The dragon's teeth cut both ways, David. And I've spent 30 years planting soldiers of my own. On the monitors, Sarah was leaving Porter's apartment, adjusting her scarf with practiced grace. In a few hours, she would return home to play her role as my loving wife, never suspecting that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. But first, I needed to make a choice. The flash drive in Marcus's hand represented truth, justice, exposure. The alternative he offered was darker, more poetic, a chance to turn 3 decades of manipulation back on its architects. The man I'd been yesterday would have chosen truth. But that man had died in stages over 30 years, replaced by something that had been unknowingly forged in the dragon's own fire. I reached for the burner phone, ready to set the wheels in motion. Sometimes, I realized, the only way to fight monsters is to become one. Make the calls, I told Marcus. It's time to wake your dragons. There's a peculiar clarity that comes with complete psychological renovation, as if every neuron has been rewired, every synapse recalibrated to a new frequency of understanding. As I sat across from Sarah at our mahogany dining table that evening, watching her delicate fingers trace the stem of her wine glass, I felt myself operating on two distinct planes of existence, the grieving husband I'd been, and the architect of destruction I'd become. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, her green eyes catching the chandelier light like faceted emeralds. The same eyes that had watched me sleep for 30 years, calculating each move in her generational game of conquest. "Just thinking about legacy," I replied, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. "About what we leave behind." A micro-expression flickered across her face, so brief I would have missed it in my previous life. Concern? No. Satisfaction. She thought I was contemplating my impending downfall, unaware that Marcus's pieces were already in motion. "Legacy is everything," she agreed, reaching across to touch my hand. The gesture was perfect, caring, intimate, practiced. "It's what gives meaning to all our sacrifices." Our children's faces smiled down at us from the family portraits lining the walls. Emily at her Harvard graduation, Christopher receiving his rowing trophy at Yale. My chest constricted as I saw them through new eyes, not just victims of their mother's deception, but unwitting soldiers in Chen Zhao's long game. How much of their lives had been orchestrated? Their friendships? Their relationships? Their careers? "I received an interesting call today," I said carefully, watching Sarah's reflection in the dark window behind her. "From our old friend in Hong Kong." The wine glass paused halfway to her lips. A tremor so slight it was almost imperceptible, but to my newly calibrated senses, it was like watching an earthquake's first seismic ripple. "Oh." Her voice remained steady, but her pulse quickened at her throat. "Business associate?" "You could say that." I smiled, channeling 3 decades of practiced affection. "He mentioned something fascinating about dragons. About their teeth." The glass touched the table with a crystalline chime that seemed to resonate through the room like a death knell. In that moment, I saw past Sarah's mask to the steel beneath, the true face of Chen Zhao's perfect weapon. "David," she said softly, dangerously, "what exactly are you trying to say?" Instead of answering, I reached for my phone, pulling up the security feed Marcus had installed. "Let's watch a movie, darling. A story about a young woman in Hong Kong, 1992. Starring a very special guest, General Chen Zhao himself." The color drained from her face as the footage played, her younger self, the secret meetings, the carefully documented trajectory of a 3-decade conspiracy. But it was the second video that broke her composure, live feed of Porter's office, where Marcus's agents were currently extracting every document, every digital record, every thread of evidence that could unravel their empire. "It's already done," I said quietly. "While we sat here discussing legacy, my own dragons were feeding on everything you built. The offshore accounts are frozen. The client relationships are secured. And Chen Zhao's entire network is being dismantled as we speak." Sarah's transformation was magnificent to behold, the loving wife vanishing like morning dew, replaced by something lethal and ancient. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "The fail-safes we put in place are neutralized." I leaned forward, letting her see the truth of what she'd created. "Did you really think I spent 30 years being blind? Or did you just forget who I was before you chose me as your target? The man who survived the Hong Kong markets. The man who dealt with Marcus Kane." "Marcus," she whispered, and for the first time, I saw real fear in those emerald eyes. "Your master made one crucial mistake," I continued, savoring each word like aged wine. He spent so long teaching you to be the perfect infiltrator that he forgot about the art of counterinfiltration. Every person you placed in my organization over the years. Each one was identified, turned, and repurposed. Your dragon's teeth became my sword. She moved with serpentine speed, but I was ready. The knife from her dinner setting clattered across the floor as I caught her wrist. "Don't," I said softly. "The authorities aren't coming for you, Sarah. That would be too clean, too public. Instead, you're going to watch as everything you built crashes down around you. Just like you planned for me. The children are safe. Protected. And will never know the truth about their mother." I released her wrist, standing slowly. "That's my gift to them. And my final cruelty to you, knowing that your perfect progeny will live their lives believing in a beautiful lie, while you live with the ugly truth." The sound she made was barely human, rage and grief and 30 years of carefully constructed identity shattering all at once. But I was already walking away, each step carrying me further from the man I'd been and closer to the architect of retribution I'd become. My phone buzzed. "Marcus. It's done. Chen Zhao is being escorted to a very private facility as we speak. Porter's trying to run, but he won't get far. Do you want to know where?" "No," I replied, climbing the stairs to my study. "Just make sure he understands, about the teeth, about the dragons. Make sure he knows who did this to him." Behind me, Sarah's sobs echoed through our mausoleum of a house, each one a note in the requiem of her fallen empire. But I felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, no relief. Only the cold certainty that tomorrow would bring a new kind of darkness, and I was finally ready to embrace it. After all, some dragons don't breathe fire. Some breathe only shadow, and in that shadow, they remake the world. Victory tastes like ashes in a mouth that's forgotten how to smile. Standing in my study 3 months after Sarah's empire crumbled, I watched dawn creep across Greenwich like a guilty secret, painting the manicured lawns in watercolor shades of redemption I couldn't quite believe in. The world had reorganized itself around the aftermath of my revenge with terrible efficiency. Chen Zhao's organization had imploded spectacularly, its tentacles withering in the harsh light of exposure. Porter had vanished into the shadowy embrace of Marcus's rehabilitation program. And Sarah. Sarah had become a ghost, haunting the corners of our children's holiday photos, her perfectly crafted maternal smile now a masterclass in desperation. I'd won. Completely, utterly, irrevocably. Yet victory had carved new hollows inside me, spaces where certainty used to live. "The transfer is complete," Marcus's voice crackled through my secure line. "The last of Chen's assets have been redistributed. Your children's trusts are secure, sanitized of any connection to the original operation. It's done. Done." Such a simple word for such a complex tapestry of destruction. And Sarah? A pause, heavy with unspoken understanding. "She's accepting the terms. The evidence we have, she knows what exposure would mean. She'll play her role, the devoted mother who tragically drifted from her husband. The divorce will be clean, sympathetic. Your children will never know." I closed my eyes, remembering the look on Emily's face at last week's dinner, the confused hurt as she watched her mother's hands tremble while pouring wine, the questions in Christopher's eyes as he noticed the new hardness in mine. They were their mother's children in intelligence, their father's in intuition. How long before they sensed the seismic shifts beneath our family's polished surface? "David," Marcus continued, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "There's something else. Something you need to see." The email arrived seconds later. Inside, a video file from 1991, a year before Hong Kong, before everything. Sarah, younger but already possessed of that fatal grace, sitting across from Chen Zhao in a room I didn't recognize. "I won't do it," her voice crackled through decades of digital degradation. "He's not like the others. There has to be another way. Chen's response was soft, almost paternal. There is no other way, my dear. Mitchell represents a unique opportunity. His potential for destruction, properly harnessed. I could turn him, Sarah interrupted. Guide him without breaking him. We need his mind intact, not just his position. The video stuttered, skipped. When it resumed, Sarah was standing, her face a mask of contained fury. You're asking me to destroy someone for the crime of being valuable. There has to be a line. The line, Chen replied, is where I say it is. Remember your family's debt. Remember Bangkok. The footage ended there, freezing on Sarah's face, a portrait of someone standing on the precipice between defiance and surrender. I stared at her expression, feeling reality shift and reform around this new piece of information. When was this recovered? My voice sounded strange, distant. Yesterday. Deep in Chen's personal files. There's more, documents from Bangkok, 1985. Sarah's family, their connection to Chen. It seems our dragon had his teeth in her long before she met you. The implications unfurled like poisonous flowers in my mind. Sarah hadn't chosen me as a target, she tried to prevent it. Her eventual surrender to Chen's plans wasn't just a mission accepted, it was a defeat, a capitulation to forces that had controlled her life long before our paths crossed. I reached for the bourbon on my desk, then stopped. Clarity, I'd learned, was a weapon sharper than any blade. And I needed all my edges now. The children, I said slowly. Their entire lives were shaped by a woman trying to protect them from becoming what she became, Marcus finished. Every choice she made, their schools, their friends, their careers, was designed to keep them out of Chen's reach. She built their cage out of gold, but she made sure it faced away from the dragon's lair. Dawn had fully broken now, the morning sun casting my shadow long across the study floor. In its distorted shape, I saw both the man I'd been and the one I'd become, victim and victor, betrayed and betrayer, a quantum state of moral ambiguity made flesh. I thought of Sarah at our wedding, her eyes bright with tears I'd always assumed were joy. Had she been mourning instead? Grieving for the life she was about to destroy, the man she might have loved in another reality? My phone buzzed one final time. A message from an unknown number. Some cages are built from the inside out. S. In that moment, I understood the true price of revenge. Not just the cost to its target, but the way it transforms the avenger. Sarah and I had become mirror images, both trapped in cages of circumstance, both making monstrous choices in the name of survival. The only difference was that I had chosen my cage, while she had been born in hers. Marcus, I said quietly, there's one more thing we need to do. David. His voice carried a warning. Some doors, once opened. I know. But our children deserve better than inherited cages. And maybe there's one more dragon that needs slaying. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Somewhere in the city, Sarah was waking up in her pristine apartment, preparing to play her role in our carefully choreographed tragedy. But roles could be rewritten. Cages could be opened. Even dragons could learn to stop breathing fire. I picked up my phone, composing a message I never thought I'd write, Bangkok. We need to talk. D. The future stretched before me like an unwritten page, no longer black with revenge or white with innocence, but painted in all the complex shades of human truth. I had become the dragon, yes. But perhaps that meant I could also choose what kind of fire to breathe. Sometimes, after all, the most powerful flames are the ones that illuminate rather than destroy.